In this episode, we dive into the impressive career of Kristie Sarno, Senior VP of Business Development at iBio. With a remarkable track record of propelling corporate strategy and fostering business development, Kristie recently orchestrated a pivotal transaction that secured a $130 million upfront investment while retaining 20% stake in the new subsidiary. Her expertise in business development, strategy, and project management has been instrumental in steering organizations through complex deal-making processes. Kristie's commitment to innovation and strategic growth, coupled with her ability to build strong relationships and lead cross-functional teams, has been the key to her success. Drawing from previous roles as Vice President, Business Development at Homology Medicines, Kristie managed and expanded valuable biotech partnerships, emphasizing collaboration to achieve corporate objectives. Kristie has a proven track record in building and growing small biotech companies and specializing in landscape and competitive intelligence, individual asset analysis, business unit strategy, and portfolio analysis. At Phoenix, Kristie led the commercial strategy for a $1.3 billion teriparatide biosimilar program and other pipeline projects, conducting market analysis, negotiating partnerships, and licensing transactions. Her experience highlights her ability to improve customer relations, manage strategic alliances, and expand business opportunities. Join us as we dive into Kristie's journey in biotech, discussing her innovative approach to leadership in the business development space. I thought that we could start with a couple of fun warm-up questions that are hopefully simple for you. All right, so if your family was introducing you to someone, how would they describe what you do for work? Would they botch it or would they be right on point?
Well, it depends on if you're talking about my kids or an adult. I think my kids think I just email all day and do a lot of meetings. That's what they say. I do a lot of meetings. My family probably has no idea what I do all day. But that's common for my role. Like there are even folks because I work in science. And so there are even, some people in the lab or sometimes don't understand what I'm doing all day. Like, how can you possibly spend the whole day on a computer?
If you could use only one or two or three words to describe yourself, what words immediately come to mind?
Oh boy. I like to think I'm fun. I do fun things. I just got back from a hiking trip in Oregon. I can be intense. I like things done a certain way. I'm a multitasker. I'm always doing something.
Productive and decisive.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, this is a nice transition into what we're going to talk about next. To get to know you a little bit better, can you share a little bit about your background and what your early life was like?
Yeah, I mean, I had sort of what you might call a traditional suburban upbringing. I lived in a small town in New Jersey. I have 3 brothers, went to public school, went to Syracuse for college. I was in marching band, so I'm a big band geek, and now my son's in marching band, so it's really fun. I started out working in a lab for 10 years after college because in high school, I had always been an English person. And in my senior year in high school, I took AP Bio, and that changed everything for me. I had a fantastic teacher, and I became interested in biology. And long story short, when I went to Syracuse, I got into the Newhouse School, which is known for, its ESPN announcers, and ended up switching out and changing major into biology my sophomore year. So not the typical thing that people do when they go to Syracuse. Everyone wants to get into Newhouse. But that was a great move for me. I worked in lab jobs for about 10 years before I got moved on to the BD side of things, and I've been doing that now for almost 20. So yeah.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. When I look at your background, you really have an impressive track record in BD and corporate strategy. Were there any defining moments in your early career that steered you towards this career track?
There are actually sort of 2. So I was working in my lab job, and we decided to license in this technology. It was a cell line that we were using to do experiments. And a person came with it to come to the lab and train me on how to use the cell line. And that person ended up being my first boss in BD. So she came over here from the Netherlands because the cell line was from Crucell, which is a company that ended up getting acquired by J&J. And the cell line, fun fact, is also the cell line that J&J used to make their COVID vaccine, which I then ended up getting in the first parts of COVID. So that was kind of cool. Sidetrack though. So my boss came and showed me how to use the cell line. And then as they were expanding that business about a half a year later, they wanted someone in Boston to do basically what she had been doing. And she thought of me and she called me. And so that was, and I jumped on that opportunity. So that was one of the first defining moments. The second defining moment was really transitioning into BD proper. So I had a few different bosses in my time at Crucell, but one of them is the one that basically said, you can't keep doing the scientific support. You have to be in BD. You're coming with me. Literally said, you're coming with me to the bio conference, dragged me around behind her and introduced me to everyone she knew and showed me what it was like to be in BD. And that was it from then on. So much fun. And I don't think I would have had the same career path if she hadn't done that.
That's incredible. It's like you had a sponsor right there built in for you, really just lifted you up and put you into a position that started you on a successful career, really.
Absolutely. Yep. And I keep in touch with her to this day.
Oh, that's great. That's even better. So shifting gears a bit, I'd love to dive into your experience with innovation. How do you foster collaboration between different departments that you work with to drive innovation in BD?
Okay, so this is a question that people like to ask a lot because some people think it's hard to innovate in BD. You know, you're gonna do a license, you're gonna have milestones, upfronts, and royalties, and you're gonna go along your merry way. But there actually is ways to innovate within BD that I found over the years. So one of the basic tenets of any job I've had is my collaboration with the R&D team. So a lot of my business development work has been with technologies and platforms, and then has, in the later years has moved on to more assets and M&A. But even speaking about business development in larger terms like that, if you don't know what's happening in your R&D world, you can't be effective. And so establishing relationships with that team, with respect to what they're working on, but also with respect to what they're interested in. So I have found that if I know what they'd love to be working on, then that can be a way for me to keep my ears open when I'm out and about talking to people about what's possible for our company. And that in past roles, that has actually come to fruition where, there's a certain expertise within the research team that may not be highlighted. And we were able to bring in some programs where that expertise could be utilized. And so that's one thing that I always have to have. It's just a basic for me that I have a good relationship and a good line of communication with the research team. But I think the other way is just in thinking about what it is that you have. I'm usually on the sell side. I have been on both sides, but 75% of my career has been on the sell side. And so what is it that I have to sell can be a really innovative question, to be honest. So at Homology Medicines, for example, we ended up spinning out our manufacturing capacity in a very unique way where we, still had a big stake in the company as it started. That started out as a conversation on, could we just transfer our manufacturing capabilities to another company for one product? And as we talked about it, it ended up being a full, spin out. So just keeping your mind open to how these things could work is the way that you can innovate. You have to have a team that's open to it. But thinking about, how do you do a partnership with a company that has no money? Right. Usually you might just walk away, but there are definitely ways to set that up that even analysts can appreciate. So you just have to think about it a little bit differently and try to figure out what it is that you have that could be valuable to a party that isn't very typical.
What advice would you give to leaders looking to cultivate innovation in their own teams?
That's a great question, because like going back to what I was just talking about as far as innovation and BD, I think I mentioned that the team has to be open to it. So that would be my advice, is to not necessarily think this is the way we have to do it. Have a conversation about, are there any other ways we can do this? Are there any assets that we can bring into this that enhance the deal? And an asset doesn't have to be a physical asset or a product or a pipeline, asset. It could be knowledge that somebody on the R&D team has about a certain research area. That can be an asset. So just keeping in mind like what it is that you have and constantly thinking about how to leverage everything that's part of your company and not just focusing on here's what's in our pipeline, here's our platform. That is the way to keep innovation going.
Is the bigger picture profile that you need to have to be able to recognize the opportunities to then, decide or put them in front of others to make the decision to move forward with a creative approach to something. It kind of rounds out your approach in a way, right?
Absolutely. And that also speaks back to the relationships with the others in the company, like keeping yourself just among your own, subset of colleagues is not helpful. Like as a BD person, you have to really be aware of, what everybody's doing. Just in case this comes up where you need to figure out what assets do we have. You need to know where they are. You need to know who to talk to. You got to keep that line of communication open, like I mentioned. Yeah,
that's a great piece of advice.
Everybody has to stay open. Yeah, everybody has to be willing to consider these different things.
To be open to foster that collaboration between the cross-functional matrix environment, to then be ready to recognize when there is an opportunity or a potential opportunity, or have the conversation so that you're not starting off cold. You have that relationship that builds trust. And then something really interesting, that's a company differential that, if that's in the culture of the company, to look beyond your own silo environment, then, there's a great opportunity for the organization to benefit and even individual growth.
Yeah. And I think even functions that you may not even consider as part of the company's assets. Like, for example, when I did a brief stint at manufacturing organization. And the main thing when I spoke about the company to others and they asked me how we were differentiated, the main thing I spoke about was the skill of the project managers we had at the time. Because the project managers were keeping those projects on time, moving, making sure they were resourced properly, making sure there were no delays. And to me, especially in an industry that's pretty standard, manufacturing, it has to be done a certain way. Having that kind of skill set, I thought was super differentiating. And so it could be anything like that. It could be, the fact that, you have an excellent clinical team that, has gotten things through before and knows how to recruit. Those can all be differentiating factors. So it could be any part of the company.
A track record of reliability that cannot be understated. That is great. That's a huge asset for a company to be able to stand behind. So very, very good identifying that being a differential when that could just, that could easily be passed over.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch over to the topic of influence. What are some key traits or skills that have helped you become more influential over time?
Well, I was actually having this conversation with a friend of mine earlier today about how she asked me a similar question in the way of, have I always been this way? And I think back to when I was a kid and myself and my next door neighbor used to try to get all the neighborhood kids to come to our backyard fairs. And so I think I have always been this way, just trying to, ask people to come do things that I want to do that needs a group. And that's carried over into my work life. I think that's just been my super skill. Is part of it is just, again, those relationships that I build with everyone in the company as much as possible. And then knowing that, okay, this is a priority for them. I can ask them for this at this time, but I can't ask them for this at that time. Or, it's a matter of respect for their priorities as well as the things I need, because often I need to get a lot of my work done through influencing because I don't have a direct line of authority with them. But I do need a lot of support from the folks on the research side, especially when we start digging into like the details of the science if I'm working on a deal. So, but I need to know, like, I can't schedule this meeting tomorrow because I know they're super busy. So things like that, that builds your influence because you are, sort of monitoring how to work with them without having to ask them repeatedly. That's really helpful.
Yeah. It's almost as if you are influence can go hand in hand with trust in a way, right? Because they are trusting that you need something. It's important. This is the timing now versus, if someone came to them for something all the time that was important, then how would they know how to differentiate what is really, truly, business critical, time critical? So that's really a great skill to have, is to know when, what the ebb and flow looks like and how to leverage that with what you need to accomplish as well for the overall, best interest of the business.
Yeah, and it can go both ways. So you can manage expectations on the other side also. So like if somebody's like, well, we want you to answer these, 25 questions. I mean, you can say in many instances, well, I'll get back to you on this day when my research team has had time to review that document. Obviously there are situations where it can become urgent, but usually it's not. If you're managing things correctly, most things are not urgent. And so it's a matter of just being on top of, expectations on both sides. So going back to them and saying, how long is it going to take you to do something before you promise to the other party that it'll get done? I mean, it sounds pretty basic, but a lot of people don't operate that way in any industry.
It's true. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of situations that seem to go well for you because this is part of what you're good at. But do you have any examples of situations where you've overcome someone else's resistance when you're trying to influence them?
Yes, I mean, obviously that is part of the game also. You don't always get your way. And again, without having direct lines of authority, you have to be subtle. I mean, one thing that you can do, you being, anybody in their function that has to use influence, is just to, if something doesn't go the way that you were expecting, is just to step back and think, okay, that didn't go like I planned. But what does it mean, for the next time? Does it mean that I need to go to a different person for that information? Does it mean that I should just take it into my body of knowledge that that person is not interested in this situation or, doesn't really want to be involved in a certain activity and just, plan accordingly the next time? Just to sort of do an evaluation. Can I do that differently so that that person or situation can be avoided next time? And if not, before the next time happens, do I need to go and have a talk with the person or the group to explain to them what I'm trying to do and why they're necessary so that when the request comes, it's not an argument. It's more like, hey, we talked about this. I'm going to need you to pitch in here. And so I've had to do that in multiple ways. And sometimes it's better to find a workaround. And sometimes it's better to just work through it in a more calm way with plenty of time and just set the stage. A lot of times if people understand what you're trying to accomplish, then it's easier for them to help you. So instead of just sending over a request, if the request comes with background, then I found that to be very helpful for anyone. Almost anyone appreciates knowing how they're part of your effort.
That makes a lot of sense. The takeaway that I have from this is to spend the time to reflect on what that challenge was. Many of us are in such a fast-paced environment in our organizations. It's on to the next, on to the next. And spending that time to understand what that situation was or how you had approached it to then determine what needs to happen next time to make this better is incredibly important. That's part of the learning and growth of the individual, which contributes to the culture and the growth of the organization.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to take the time to do that at a time when you yourself if it was a tense situation, at a time when you yourself has calmed down. Because in the moment, if you try to reflect on it in the moment, all you're going to feel is, well, I can't believe that happened, But if you really think about it the next day, I mean, most of the things that happen at work are about work and aren't personal to you, even if it seemed like a personal interaction. So if you really think about it the next day, you're like, okay, well, this person may have, 50 things on their plate that I didn't know about. So let me just regroup here and think about it from a different perspective. And that can be so important.
Taking the emotion out of it really can help clarify what the situation is about.
Yeah.
If you can leave our listeners with one key takeaway about the power of influence, either in general or in your work environment in BD and corporate strategy, what would it be?
I mean, a lot of people don't like to have to rely on influence to get things done other than being like in charge. I actually think it's better because I like to do this, but I'm also forced to build relationships in order to get my work done. I mean, that's BD. That's my job, so I kind of like doing that. But I think it's good practice for everybody to be out of their comfort zone, talking to other groups within their company and really learning about the people they're working with. It's such a good way to get things done. And it shouldn't have to rely on, I'm your boss, so I told you, or my boss told you, or all those other power dynamics that really are just background noise when you're trying to get a project done.
Great point. Love it. That's great. Now shifting focus, let's look at our leadership specific topic of empathy. Why do you believe empathy is an important quality for leaders to have?
Well, I mean, this is something that I've worked on a lot over the last several years in particular. I used to think I was really good at empathy. And I had a couple of situations where it was pointed out to me that I was not. So it was a scenario where I was like, well, this is work. How come you're upset? You can't be upset, like no crying in baseball. But, some people do get upset about things that I don't get upset about. And I needed to recognize that and learn how to interact with different people in different ways. And I think you can always learn on that front. And so I do a lot of that work through an executive coach who helps you, like I mentioned, helps you step back and kind of try to learn or imagine what someone else's perspective might be that you didn't immediately think of. And so that is where empathy comes in. So all of the examples I've been talking about, you have to include that empathy. So I mentioned, maybe someone had 50 things on their plate. It could be they have 50 things on their plate from work, but it could also be that they're going through a divorce or they have an ill child or something they don't want to tell you about, but is happening to them that could be affecting how they interact with you. And you don't necessarily need to know what that is, but you need to have the perspective that they may have something going on that has nothing to do with you. And so just kind of keeping those things in mind as you reflect on certain situations helps. Also keeping in mind, especially for me, I have to talk to myself about this a lot. Not everybody works the way I do. Especially in science, a lot of people don't want to go around making relationships with the rest of the people in their company. That's not comfortable for them, and helping them think about ways that it can be comfortable for them. That isn't necessarily how I would do it. Is how I've helped some folks along the way. So, networking is good for everyone, but if you're an introvert, there's no way you want to walk into a room full of 200 strangers and start talking to people. Whether that's good advice or not, if it's not part of your comfortable personality set, you're not going to be good at it anyway. So how can you accomplish the same thing? Maybe you reach out to one or two people and have a more intimate conversation with a smaller group. Maybe that's how you network. Can be just as effective. You don't have to do it the same way. When I'm talking about building relationships with other functions, you don't have to do it the way I do it. You can do it your own way. And there's lots of ways to do that. And there's lots of ways to approach building relationships that aren't the way I would do it. So that's kind of what I've been working on over the past few years, because I think it's helpful for me to think about what might be good for a personality type that isn't like me, but it's also helpful for me to think about how to react to certain situations or how to not react to certain situations.
That's a key
Often even more
word there.
important.
Right. Well, something you said early in this conversation, in this topic area, you talked about the way in which people interact, and sometimes they may respond in a way that isn't the expected response. And they could be going through something personal at home. So it just made me think about how it's important to give people the benefit of the doubt that they want to do the right thing. There's something in their way that is not seen by you, by me, between what it is that you're trying to accomplish and the response. And there's something in between there. And giving people that benefit of the doubt that they want to do the right thing, that they're trying to accomplish it, but there's something that is a challenge that they're not able to or wanting to share at that moment to help you understand. So you have to think about, okay, well, it's probable that, I approach this in the way that I thought was the best way possible. And, and this is the outcome,
Yeah. And maybe the way I thought was the best way to approach it was not appreciated by the other party. So, I mean, you don't always know, but trying to find a different way to approach it just in case can be helpful.
All right. Well, I really loved how you framed empathy in a couple of different contexts. And I want to talk a little bit more about mentorship. You touched on that a little bit. Let's go into it a little bit more. The mentorship ideology can be really different from person to person. Can you tell me about your philosophy around mentorship?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this before, how I have a little bit of a different view because I have done a lot of work with organizations like Women in Bio, gone to a lot of networking events. I hear this topic talked about all the time. And it's talked about in this way of, if you don't have a mentor, your career is stalled. And it's just such a confusing topic. And I think people don't realize that they always have mentors already. And it sort of becomes couched in this, there's one person who is the mentor, there's one person who is the mentee, and people picture them meeting for coffee and having these conversations where there's like life-changing career advice being given, and that's how you move forward. And what I have found over the years with both myself and, my colleagues and peers is that you probably already have mentors. So there's a couple of different groups. So your friends can be your mentors. If you have some mom friends in town that you talk about work with, those are your mentors. If you're reviewing situations with them and getting their opinion on what to do, those are your mentors. You have mentors already. Most people have a low level of mentorship from friends, colleagues, people they used to work with, people they go out for beers with. And that's mentorship. I mean, it goes back to what we were saying on the empathy side of learning someone else's viewpoint or way of viewing a situation is mentorship because it helps you look at it from a different perspective. And that's sometimes all you need.
It's the way in which you define mentorship. I think that maybe mentorship, because it's such a big topic area, that there's a desire to put it in a box of what it looks like and to define that box. And I really like what you said about saying, well, it's a creative approach to appreciating the people and the influences that you have around you and using and leveraging that to say, no, I'm not doomed to my career. I'm not doomed because I don't have someone that I am regularly scheduled to meet with on Monday afternoon at 3:00 at this Starbucks location. But I really appreciated that my friend responded to me and supported me in this, for this specific situation and made me feel heard, and it gave me a chance to step back and reflect and, was a catalyst for the actions that I'm going to do next. So I really like your approach to it being more of a grassroots and really appreciating what you have already in hand.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that having mentors that are a higher level than you, or not necessarily a higher level, but the level you want to be, you should have those relationships as well. And those you do have to sometimes seek out a little more formally. So I do think there should be different layers of mentors, but I don't think people should be, as you just summarized, I don't know if scared is the right word, but people shouldn't feel like I'm not on the right track because I haven't identified, biotech leader X as my mentor, and mentors can come and go too. That's the other thing. You don't have to get a mentor and keep a mentor. As your career evolves, maybe some people aren't as useful with respect to those types of conversations anymore. So you need to have a different type of mentor, especially as you move into different roles in your career. Maybe at some points you need a more technical mentor. At some points you need a more like business and leadership kind of mentor. And sometimes you need a mentor if you're trying to switch into a different type of role or you're really trying to move up. So even if you're trying to move laterally, but, say from the lab into IP, you might need a mentor on the IP side. So it's just, that term is used like it's always a formal relationship. You should be having these types of people in and out of your, your sphere as you go along.
Yeah, great. A component of that comes to mind is, where is it that you want to go? Make that decision, be clear about that so that you can then better identify the person or people that can support you. And you can then know where best to seek out a mentor to help you get to that next level or help you change careers or help you, do whatever it is that you need, that you want to do, because you're more clear. And when you're more clear, usually you have conversations with people. It tends, you tend to happen upon people who are, at the same, who are vibing with you at that level. So let me ask you, Kristi, did you ever have someone help you navigate in a time of crisis or significant change in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I engaged an executive coach, and I give myself credit for this almost at the right moment. I mean, I was in a situation where I was complaining about my quality of life at work a lot. And I was using some of my mentors to work through that. But I was also realizing that there's a certain point where complaining about your work is not helping you. And I got to this point where I was like, I feel like there's something I'm missing here that no one I work with is going to point out to me. I felt like maybe it was intangible. Maybe it was the way I was speaking. Maybe it was my lack of empathy that I wasn't aware of yet. Maybe it was something that is the kind of thing, it's not execution related. It's not you're doing your job wrong, but I knew there was something missing. And I really wanted an unbiased third party that wasn't afraid to tell me, well, you're coming across like this, or you're not showing up like this. And so I ended up hiring a coach right at that time, and she was amazing getting me through a transition that I didn't know was about to happen. And just setting me up in my new role once I did transition for success with like specific ideas for how to build relationships. That move that, was during some, difficult, timing for certain things. And so she helped me navigate that. And so I just feel like if you do have the resources to engage someone like that, it's a great idea. It used to have this connotation that you only got a coach when you were messing up. I think it's more accepted now that people are going and seeking coaches for their own benefit, and it can be hugely helpful.
That's great. I can really tell that you are action oriented and you are, solution focused. And I think those are really key attributes to what has made you successful in your career. And, it doesn't mean that you've found all the solutions yourself. It's that you've elicited the support that you needed cross-functionally, matrix environment, in this case with a career coach. Really great examples. All right, so that actually helps us transition a little bit into another topic that I want to talk about with you, which is wellness. Are there any specific mindfulness or wellness practices that help you either stay grounded and focused, or on the other side, that impact your energy levels and performance?
I have a couple. They're not as formal as a lot of people. Like I don't have a journal or anything like that. But I did start riding my bike several years ago. And a lot of runners will describe this too. Like when I'm on my bike and I have music and I'm by myself, my mind wanders wherever it wants to go. To me, it's like a form of meditation. And I solve a lot of work problems that way because I'm just sort of outside. I'm looking around. I'm enjoying nature. I'm not staring at a screen. I'm not trying to get something done. And that's just like creative energy for me. It's also, you're exercising. So all the benefits of that. So I found that to be amazingly helpful. And that's not why I started doing it, but that is where I think through work problems a lot. And the other one, honestly, is the shower. If I take a really long shower, that's again, it's another area where there's nothing coming at you. There's no media, there's no screen, there's no phone. The kids are very well trained and not to interrupt mom when she's taking a shower. So, just time to just let the water flow and let your brain go where it wants to go. And honestly, again, same thing. It's just like you need to be in this environment where, you're blocked from things coming at you is the way I describe it. And I've actually asked some of my mentors that question before, especially like very busy leaders, CEOs of companies, like, do you actually block time to think? Everybody says you're supposed to do that. Do you actually do that? And some of them do. They have time in their calendars. Sometimes it'll get taken up. Sometimes they end up reading during it. But there are a lot of leaders who will block off time on their calendar that they just want to be open and sitting and doing whatever it is they do to let their mind ruminate on whatever is going on. And if you don't do that, it's just too much. It's just too much for everyone these days with all the different types of media and all the things to worry about and all the things that have to get done. And everybody's life is so busy.
It's true. I think too about your example of running, and you can't just run forever. You're going to need to stop and sleep and eat and and recharge so that you can do that longer run in 2 days from then. So yeah, I don't think that can be underemphasized, that time to just not think. And I know there's a ton of research. I was just listening to a YouTube short video about someone who describes just that, and she describes the science behind it. I'm going to have to link it to this video.
Awesome.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about some fun questions for you. Do you have any hidden talents or hobbies that people might be surprised to learn about you?
Well, it's not really that hidden, but one of my hobbies is biking, but I do have a black belt in Taekwondo. I don't do that anymore, but once you have your black belt, you have it. So I get to say that. So that's usually a surprise to people. What else? Not really. Most of my hobbies went out the door when I started having kids. So I'm trying to work on bringing some things back in, but we'll see what happens.
I understand that. I've got 2 young kids.
I mean, my kids aren't that young anymore, but they take over that whole time.
All right. So let's take our conversation home with some shout outs. If you were to name 1 or 2 or 3 people that have influenced your career path, who would they be?
Well, now I don't know if they would want their names, but maybe I'll say, so, my AP bio teacher in high school, I mentioned that. Martina Molsbergen is the person at Crucell who dragged me into BD. She's amazing. Almost everybody knows her. So, and she's, I give her that credit for bringing me into BD. There's a few people at Women in Bio who recognize me, convince me to take a leadership role within the national organization, and I really didn't want to. And that has been a game changer for me as far as my network, my confidence level. The things that you can work on in a volunteer organization are different than what you can work on at work. So I encourage everyone to try to find a volunteer organization that they can fit, either career related or not, that really, helps you feel like you're part of something that isn't something you need to get done, but it's something you want to do. That was a good piece of advice that I got from someone in the industry. Yeah, and then there's just been so many colleagues and bosses or other executives that have given me great advice over the years, either in a brutally honest way or in a nice way, however it's been delivered. But I could tell they were trying to be supportive. And listening to various pieces of advice is what I consider one of my super skills. Just being open to advice, listening to it. You don't have to accept everyone's advice, but there's been times in my, along the path, like for example, when J&J bought Crucell, what was going to happen to my role, what was going to happen to the company. I was like, oh, everything's going to be fine. And people are like, no, consider these 3 things. And so I did consider those 3 things, and they turned out to be right, because they'd been around longer than I had. So, just being open to advice, and lots of people have helped me.
Great. Good. In closing, what's one thing you want listeners to take away from this conversation today?
I think anybody who's listening to a podcast like this is probably open to, how can I move my career forward? What can I do differently? Who can I learn from? And so just hopefully they got a few tidbits from our conversation that resonated with them, that they can be like, oh yeah, I can do that one. Start with that one, see how it goes, and then go from there. Like, don't feel like you have to do everything to change your career because you listen to this podcast even, or you went to a networking event. Just pick one thing, and see how it goes for you, and then see if that makes a change.
Great. Very good advice, and a lot of insightful advice today. It's really been fun talking to you, Kristi. As we wrap up, where can someone find you if they want to look you up?
The easiest place is probably LinkedIn. I'm pretty, present on LinkedIn. I use it as my Rolodex, use an old-fashioned term. I post where I'm going to be and what I'm doing on there. So happy to connect with people through LinkedIn. And I just want to say too, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you, and thank you for having me here.
Great. Well, let's wrap it today. Thank you so much. And I look forward to following you on LinkedIn, seeing what you're up to, and seeing you rise to even greater successes as your career continues to grow.
Thank you so much.
As we wrap up, Kristi's journey offers a powerful reminder of the impact of influence, empathy, and trust in leadership. She's shown us that by aligning influence with trust, leaders can build collaborative and innovative teams. Through reflection, she's developed a keen ability to navigate resistance, strengthening team alignment, and supporting larger goals. Her insights into mentorship reveal the value of seeking diverse sources of guidance and the importance of wellness and balance in sustaining energy as a leader. We hope Kristi's journey inspires you to lead with empathy, embrace mentorship, and maintain the bigger picture in mind. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.